Republican Senator Tim Scott is slamming President Biden for sounding the alarm on the fate of American democracy.
What we have not seen from the Biden administration is that type of unifying message that people rally around. Why would we have the President of the United States deliver a soul-crushing speech that was unnecessary, polarizing, and inflammatory?
Scott's view is shared by many Republicans who continue to criticize the president for his primetime remarks, but Vice President Kamala Harris doubled down in an interview that aired earlier today, saying it's actually election-denying candidates and lawmakers who back January 6th rioters who continue to pose the biggest risk.
I think it is very dangerous, and I think it is very harmful, and it makes us weaker. You look at everything from the fact that there are 11 people right now running for Secretary of State, the keepers of the integrity of the voting system of their state, who are election deniers. You couple that with people who hold some of the highest elected offices in our country who refuse to condemn an insurrection on January 6th.
And I'm joined now by CNN senior political analyst and host of the CNN digital series Reality Check Extremist Beat, John Avlon, and CNN political commentator and host of PBS's Firing Line, Margaret Hoover, also AKA Hoovalon. Guys, thank you very much for being with us. It sounds as though the debate has been teed up for the American people for these upcoming weeks as we head towards November. It sounds like truth is on the ballot this November.
Well, look, truth is on the ballot, runs a risk of overstating it. But at the end of the day, when you've got election deniers running on the ballot, if folks don't vote against them, they're voting for a lie. And I do think that it's not divisive to say that there's an attempt to undermine our democracy. And if people like Tim Scott, who's a good man, wants to, unite the nation and criticize President Biden for calling that out, then he's also got to condemn Donald Trump and the election deniers running under his party's banner to be the kind of unifier that he hopes to see. And I'm not seeing that from him yet.
I do want to be fair to Senator Scott, though. I mean, he was talking about President Biden's lack of an ability to have brought the country together under the banner of unity, which he ran on and which was the high hope for the Biden administration. I think it is a fair criticism that many Republicans and frankly centrist Democrats, up until very recently in the recent legislative achievements of the Biden administration, is that President Biden hasn't been that sort of unifying figure, hasn't governed that way. Remember I know John Avlon's laughing.
I'm not laughing, I'm disagreeing.
This is Joe Biden sort of won with a very split Senate and then governed as though he wanted to be FDR. And that has changed in the last few months. I grant you that. But that, I think, is what Senator Scott was speaking to. I will say at the same time, and I'm going to go quick.
But Margaret, wasn't his legislative agenda was always going to be very Democratic leaning?
Yeah, but
right?
But he never was going to.
Unifying the country has more to do with trying to repair things after January 6th, bringing the country together after January 6th.
Well, I mean, that was what I hope bringing the country together after January 6th would have been the highest and best hope, and then governing not from not as though he had 60 or 70, a supermajority in the Senate. He had only 50 and barely had the Senate. And he governed with the aspiration of being this transformational FDR kind of president, not one who barely had a Senate. But the other point I want to say, though, and let me just concede this, is that I have been surprised by the level of, and maybe I shouldn't have been, some may call me naive, but the level of vitriol with which Republicans have spoken about Joe Biden, not as though he were a good man pursuing bad policies they disagree with, but as though, just talking about him the way we would talk about the leader of a country who is not aligned with the United States. So I would prefer to see a different tone and tenor from the GOP, just generally.
Let me just add one last thing to that. Look, if you look at the legislative record of this Congress and this president, there have been more bipartisan pieces of legislation and significant ones passed because a significant number of Republicans voted for them.
But they're
to their credit.
No,
not like this. And so I think that is a measure of being able to bring the country together, even if fundamentally the polarization in our country is so toxic that even senators can't acknowledge that.
We're both right.
Well, let me move on to the next subject. After Vice President Kamala Harris questioned the legitimacy of the U.S. Supreme Court this week, Chief Justice John Roberts, we heard him defend the court in his first public comments since the Dobbs decision. Let's talk about that. Let's listen to what he had to say.
Lately, the criticism is phrased in terms of, because of these opinions, it calls into question the legitimacy of the court. Simply because people disagree with an opinion is not a basis for questioning the legitimacy of the court.
And back in July, Justice Elena Kagan, who dissented when the court overturned Roe v. Wade, she warned about the importance of preserving the court's legitimacy. Let's watch that as well.
And I'm not talking about any particular decision or even any particular series of decisions, but if over time the court loses all connection with the public and with public sentiment, that's a dangerous thing for a democracy. We have a court that does important things. And if that connection is lost, that's a dangerous thing for the democratic system as a whole.
And according to an August Pew Research Center poll, American confidence in the court is sinking to a record low. You can see it dip sharply after the abortion ruling. Guys, do we see a danger in how the court is being perceived right now?
Yes.
And is it more than just a perception?
Look, I gotta say,
No.
I actually don't think, no, it is not a perception. The court is, like every institution, plummeting in faith and standing, but this is new because the court had been protected from this lacking confidence. And what Justice Roberts, of course, didn't take into account was the fact that the court represents a Republican Senate's and a Republican president's agenda over the last 8 years, or President Trump's 4 years, that put Brett Kavanaugh in, that didn't put Merrick Garland in, that where the political process, while completely legal, was not, the left feels was not in good faith.
Yeah, with good reason.
And with good reason. And so I don't think actually Justice Roberts behind closed doors would disagree with anything Elena Kagan said. That's the irony of the whole thing, is that he's the one who supposedly tried to forge a consensus behind closed doors, if you believe the reporting, on the Dobbs decision.
And it would have been better for the country and the court had he succeeded, in my opinion. But I think the larger point is this is a cautionary tale about what happens when the Supreme Court gets politicized, as it has been. And two members of the court did not tell the truth to the Senate when asked directly about the role of precedent and Roe, and took the first opportunity to overturn 50 years of precedent because it's an ideological agenda. So this is a cautionary tale about politicizing institutions that at best should be nonpartisan. And in the recent past, you had appointees from Democratic and Republican presidents who did not vote in lockstep with their party's preference. That's healthy because that represents independence of judgment. That's what we seem to have lost.
And I want to get to this final thing. This week, Republican Congressman Louis Gohmert presented a U.S. flag that flew above the Capitol to a woman who was convicted for her role in the Capitol attack. These are photos posted on the rioters' Twitter account. Guys, what do we think? I mean, a U.S. congressman rewarding someone who was part of what happened on January 6th?
Just leave me 15 seconds at the end. John Avalon, go ahead.
If you want a museum piece for the insanity that has overtaken our politics in the wake of January 6th, this is it. And it's not just because it's Louis Gohmert. The insanity of a member of Congress giving a flag that rose above the Capitol to someone who attacked the Capitol. The persistent belief that attackers are victims if they agree with you politically because they tried to overturn our democracy and they should be treated as heroes and martyrs. That is a symptom of a sickness and a psychosis that is twisting our politics and our judgment. And this is one of the worst examples of that I've seen, certainly from a member of Congress.
I'm just going to add a couple of facts. More than 800 people have been prosecuted by the Department of Justice. Only 125 have served time in prison or jail. This woman is one of those, okay? A representative of Congress who was in the U.S. Capitol building that was attacked is rewarding a criminal.
Honoring.
A criminal.
Yeah.
Okay, and a criminal who tried to undermine our democracy. And so that's the piece that I think is just so stinging here.
Yeah, if you're rewarding somebody who is, breaking into the Capitol and doing what they were doing on January 6th with an American flag that flew over the Capitol, then I do think the truth is very much at stake in these coming weeks.